Right, welcome back to our weekly Wednesday live episode on the Ohio Investors Group page. Today's topics, we're a little bit early. Normally we do this at noon, but we're going in at 10. But our today's topics is the top 5 things to be aware of when investing in Ohio. And what we want to discuss here is a lot of our out-of-state investors are coming from different territories, different worlds than what we live in and we're aware of. So we have these common reoccurring conversations every time when we're talking to out-of-state investors. If we're not, we need to be. Let's dive right in and talk about the first one. Cleveland is not the only state, not the only city in Northeast Ohio. Does everybody agree there?
Yeah, and first thing everybody puts in their bigger pockets thing is I'm looking to invest in Cleveland.
Okay.
And most of them don't even know there's other places.
What are some of the other cities we have up here in Northeast Ohio that people should be interested in investing in?
Akron.
Okay, so we got Akron, Canton,
Lorraine.
Okay, Cuyahoga Falls, Medina. The major cities that we're talking about up here, though, are going to be Akron and Canton, and a lot of those other ones are little suburbs of those cities. So when we talk about Cleveland, we all know the Cleveland Browns, the Cleveland Indians, Guardians, whatever you want to call them nowadays. Cleveland, Cleveland, Cleveland. There's a lot of stuff there. But what they don't know is that little city that's about, 35 minutes south of there. It's a city all into itself. It's got the tall buildings and everything. Akron. What is Akron known for? What are they famous for?
Rubber.
Tires.
Rubber, tires.
Goodyear.
So we got the Goodyear blimp. It flies over a lot of sporting events and stuff. Speaking of sporting events, one of the most popular people out there right now is who? Plays for the Lakers. LeBron James. He was born in Akron, Ohio. So Akron is a city unto itself. And then just below that is Canton. What's Canton famous for?
Football Hall of Fame.
The Football Hall of Fame. If you haven't been there and you're buying investment properties, it's a reason to come out and look at investment properties. Because when you're out here looking at these investment properties, you can hit the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you can hit the Football Hall of Fame, all within less than an hour of each other. And then go see some investment properties. Go ahead, Jake.
Not only that, we have property managers that cover all three, Cleveland or Cuyahoga County, Summit County, Stark County. So you could buy in any of those areas and still have the same property manager representing.
Absolutely. We also have these other two little cities that are kind of out on the fringes of our territory, but still could be talked about. You got Toledo and everything in between, because there's Cedar Point up there, which is a huge, what do you call it? It's an amusement park, but for short-term rentals and things like that, that could be an area that could be talked about. Going the other direction, you got Youngstown way over by the border of Pennsylvania, which also has a lot of investment opportunities as well. So we've got Toledo, we've got Youngstown, we've got Canton, we've got Akron, we also have Cleveland. So what we want to do is encourage people not to just call about Cleveland, because there's some lead-based paint stuff up there in Cleveland that makes it a little bit harder to be a landlord. Not impossible, but a little bit harder. So we often encourage that to happen. Okay, so that was number.
Clarify what you're saying there real quick. He says there's lead-based paint up there. There's a lead-based paint ordinance. It's the only place in the area that actually tests for it. There's lead-based paint everywhere, but they're the only place that actually tests for it as an investor, and that's why you got to be careful.
And it's every 2 years, that they're testing for it. So it makes it a little bit more challenging to be an investor up there when you have that requirement every 2 years, and you don't have it in these other municipalities. All right,
the other thing to talk about, Blaise, is the fact that Cleveland, Akron, Canton, as Akron and Canton and Cleveland continue to grow, it's almost becoming one huge metropolitan area of Cleveland, Akron, Canton. It's all zoned together, and there's all kinds of small towns in there that have multifamily stuff in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You take the town that Blaise and I live in, Medina, and some of the other guys here live in Medina. This county, it's ideal because it's a quick shot to either Akron or Cleveland or Canton, and that's why people get relocated here all the time. So it's a good place for investment properties as well.
And Scott, I watched one of your videos here on the page, and you were talking about the tax difference between going into Cuyahoga versus down in Akron and Canton. Tell us a little bit about that. What you discovered.
Yeah, I found a website that kind of just approximated what your tax bill would be, and versus Cuyahoga County, Stark County is about 2/3 of what Cuyahoga County is in property taxes.
Huge difference in your cash flow at the end of the month when your taxes are lower. So it's just going to make a big difference from what your expenses are when your taxes are lower. So number 5 was Cleveland is not the only city in Northeast Ohio, and we really did, covered that well. Let's talk about number 4.
They are the only one that has a river that burns up.
It is.
Come on now, really?
So number 4, let's talk about number 4. We have seasons. It snows. We have spring. We have winter, fall. And everything in between. What does that mean to you guys when you're hunting for either residential or multifamily? What are some of the challenges we face in Northeast Ohio that they
and
may
we
not
have all those seasons on the same day sometimes.
We do. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
What are some challenges?
It does make a difference on the properties because people, first off, and we estimate for that when we're running our numbers, is they got to take care of snow removal. They've got to take care of lawn maintenance. And some of these, you go some areas of the country, there is no lawn. It's rock, desert out in their front yard, and there is no snow. But we've got to watch for all of that.
So talking just about snow, we have these things here that most states aren't, really privy to, but we have these things called snow belts. Actually, all of Northeast Ohio is called the Rust Belt because our cars don't last as long as everywhere else. But within Northeast Ohio, we have these snow belts where we get lake effect snow coming off of Lake Erie. And once you get to the east side of Cleveland, they get a lot more snow than what maybe Canton sees or Medina sees or things like that. So when you get a lot more snow, what do you have to be aware of? I mean, that snow removal is a whole different level of expense because you're doing it constantly versus, in Medina, you may be doing it once or twice a month. Out there, you're doing it every other day because we're talking. What's that?
I was just saying, if it's not obvious, unlike lawn care, where you could schedule however often you want the lawn taken care of, snow removal is not a continuous basis of hey, I need this done once a week or anything. Which is why it's important to have a situation arranged with the contractor and snow removal company to be on call, because when those storms do come, that's when your tenants are going to be calling you saying, we need help to get out of here in order to go about our lives. And it's important to have that relationship set up before the storm comes, because that's who, those properties and arrangements are going to be who they target first before, in the morning when everyone wakes up.
Okay.
Yeah, and once it's snowing, you're not going to be able to find somebody to come out there. They all have their list of where they got to go, and
yeah, they're already busy.
Yeah.
Let me just add something to that thought. We had a meeting with a property manager a while back on here, and he talked about how rentals with garages seem to hold on to renters more than ones that don't. And this is why. It's not necessarily the summertime. It's when it's 10 below and your car's got 6 inches of snow on it, it's nice to have it in the garage.
That's actually a real good point, that in our area, a house that has, because you'll find rentals without AC and you'll find rentals without garages.
They all have heat.
They all have heat. But, garages make a big difference for people. That allows you to increase that rent quite a bit because they don't have to shovel their snow off their car every time. And AC, same thing in the summertime. So.
Yeah. So.
Also in the city, in Cleveland, older cities, they may not even have a garage for homes, your duplexes. And then when a lot of snow comes, a snow parking ban will go into effect, and then you can't even park on the street. So now you don't have a garage. Some of these driveways are gravel and grass in some of these really older homes. So now what do? You got 2 or 3 people living in this home, and you got to jockey cars, and you got to get them off the street. It's a logistical nightmare sometimes.
That's a real good point, Rich.
Yeah, the parking ban is a big deal when you're in very populated area, because if you can't park in the street, where are you going to park? And they'll plow you in. If your car
Right.
is sitting on the road, they'll pile it on. You'll get 3 or 4 feet of snow on that car, and you're not getting out till spring.
It's true. I've been there.
Or it's stuff deep the next day.
Yeah.
Try.
Okay, so we talked about the snow. What about the other seasons? We talked a little bit about summer. You got different levels of lawn maintenance, and does anybody want to elaborate what I mean on that? I mean spring versus later in the summer. So
Well, in the spring, my grass grows so fast I need to cut it every 4 days, but you can set it up for a week. But, and in the summer, you hardly have to cut it at all.
right. So it's hard to estimate those things, and that's where when we're talking to clients, we're using an average over the year versus trying to say monthly it's this. Because if you live in let's say California, you may be able to pay your landscaper $200 a month. They come out every 2 weeks. They trim your hedges and mow the lawn and do all that stuff. But here in Northeast, it's not as easy as that. We get a ton of grass growth in May, where when you get to August, you might be mowing once a month because it's dry and we don't get a lot of rain, and it starts to transition. Now, after August and September, we transition to a whole nother season. We go into fall. What's the number one thing that we got to look out for there?
Leaves.
Leaves.
Leaf removal.
How many of you guys got trees in your yards and got a rake? There's
Gutters.
I don't have trees in my yard for that very reason.
You're the smart one.
Yep, absolutely. So if I'm a landlord and I own a multi-family property and there's trees in the yard, I got to be aware of that, because it has a huge impact on that home, because the leaves fall off the trees, they fall on your roof, they go in your gutters, and now all of a sudden your gutters are full of leaves, and your gutters start to overflow, and you start getting what do you call it, where stuff washes
Ice
away.
damming.
Where the ground washes away. Why can't I think of the word?
Erosion.
Erosion. You start getting erosion, and the water starts to come back towards the foundation, and now all of a sudden leaves on the roof cause your basement to be leaky. So it's important, if you're investing in Ohio, that you realize in the fall you got to get somebody out there to do some leaf maintenance and take care of that stuff for you. And then we go a whole nother season, because we already talked about winter. Actually, is there anything else in fall that maybe I missed that you guys are thinking of?
Yeah, Mike made a mention about the leaves too. Regarding ice damming, which you got to be careful too. And you got roof and water leaks inside the house. So.
Yeah,
Let's
absolutely.
go, but let me just talk about that back up towards winter at one point. It's not always snowfall down here in Stark County. It's ice. They get a lot of ice storms down here, and you may not be plowing snow, but somebody better be salting the walks.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good point.
So question, when you're talking to investors about the snow belt that you mentioned earlier, Blaise, wouldn't it be important to bring up those roofs, those gutters, those structures are going to get hammered and hit more on the east side than they are on, south or on the west side. So would you talk about a potential contingency that you might want to consider if you're looking at a particular property that's older, that might not have had any upgrades in recent years?
Could be. I mean, it's going to be a property by property basis is how I discuss it with people, because we might have an investor looking in the snow belt, and then the next day they're not looking in the snow belt. It's important that they have a real estate team like us that understands the ins and outs of all the intricacies of this process. Because if you're just calling a brand new agent that really doesn't understand the market, or dealing with investors and understanding they don't get what our market is like, they're just trying to sell them a house because they're trying to make commission. We sell enough houses that it's not all about commission. We're trying to help people, because when you're an investor, we understand you're not buying just one property. You might be buying 10 over the next 4 or 5 years. We want to earn the right to help you with all 10. And by bringing these things up on this video, or bringing them up in our day-to-day conversations when we're working with investors, that's what's truly important. So springtime, that's a whole nother thing that we deal with. And springtime brings with it rain. You get a ton of rain in the spring. Plus you had all the melting snow. We might have 2, 3, 4 feet of snow that was sitting on the ground. it rains, melts the snow, and now you have flash flood warnings all over the place. You have people with their basements backing up. What have some of you guys experienced with the heavy rains and backups and stuff in the spring?
Oh, I've had basements flood, and not from a problem with the basement itself, but just the sewers backing up because the street sewers were so overtaxed with water.
Or somebody hasn't had their sump pump looked at in years and they don't realize it's not operating. That's a huge issue.
Absolutely. I mean,
Let's talk about what a sump pump is. A lot of people probably don't even know what we're talking about when we say sump pump. And out here, if you've got a basement, you better have a sump pump that just sits in a cask and pumps out any excess water that happens to come into the basement. I always tell people the basement's a hole in the ground you got to keep water out of.
Absolutely. So you got water intrusion coming from the outside of the brick or poured wall, concrete foundation coming through, but you also have the problem of if the sewers back up or something like that. There's this little device that you're supposed to have checked once a year, but nobody does. It's called a backflow valve. And you got to check it to make sure that that water is not going to push back into your house. It has the right to flow out, but when outside water starts to accumulate, that valve will shut and not allow water to come back in. Most people don't have that checked once a year. Plumbers would be rich if they did, because there's so many houses here in Northeast Ohio. But just little things like that you got to think of when you're buying properties. We're not trying to talk you out of them. It's just be aware. As a landlord, you want to be in communication with your property manager and your realtor when you're buying to make sure you're not buying a property that's a problem. We always look at the lowest price properties trying to get huge cash flows, but when you got to pay to have a basement fix or a sump pump or any of that stuff, that takes away from your cash flows and you need to be aware of it.
One thing we didn't think of, you're talking about winter and you're talking about plumbers, it brought to mind is disconnecting your hose from your spigot outside. Your tenants are going to be washing their cars. They got a hose connected to that spigot. If they don't disconnect it come wintertime, it could cause a freeze and a split in the pipe and water in the basement.
Absolutely. I mean, there's certain things where a house is built, and there's not a lot of insulation on the exterior wall. And when it was originally built, the kitchen sink is up against that wall. And we get cold enough days here, negative 20, where it's going to get to that pipes underneath those cabinets, because those cabinet doors are shut and all that cold is pressing in from the outside. It'll freeze, underneath the kitchen cabinet if it's not insulated properly, or having your tenants just simply prop the cabinet door open so something doesn't freeze. Huge problem. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, so go ahead.
I was going to say, if you do go down the path of like buying a property, you mentioned like the sewage backup and things. If you've never talked to an insurance agent and they've asked you if you want like sewage backup coverage, that is something that's common in Northeast Ohio, that like insurance agents will ask, do you want this, because of all these reasons that were listed. So that's just something to keep in mind when they bring it up. You're like, why are you asking me about that? These are the reasons why an insurance agent will ask you if that's coverage you want to protect yourself and your tenants' belongings that might be in the basement.
Great topic. I love that you brought that up. So number 5 is Cleveland, not the only city. Number 4 is we have seasons. Number 3, we have both hot and cold, which falls into the seasons category. But what I want to talk about with that is the fact that we have both air conditioning and furnaces and many other types of heating or cooling sources. Can you guys give me a few that you've seen as you're going through different properties?
See a lot of heat pumps.
Heat pumps, all electric, okay?
Boiler systems.
Boiler systems. Boiler systems are a huge thing if you're an investor to understand and know when you're looking at a property, because most of the time when you have a boiler system, you know immediately that your utilities are not separate, because the boiler system just spins and sends the water out to the house. That's all one constant temperature. So you're paying for the heat, and it's important that you're paying attention to that through your property manager and things. So what else do we have? What are some other items? Mini splits. I've seen those. That's another all-electric system. That's actually
Those are becoming more popular in
they are, and it's a cheap way of updating a house because a lot of rental properties don't have the ductwork that's necessary to put in air conditioning. So you have these window units throughout the building. But if a landlord comes in and wants to make it where that property has AC to raise the rents, putting in a mini split is a good way of upgrading that property. I just had that conversation with an investor the other day. So mini splits is another one. Boiler systems, your gas furnace, your electric heat pump. What about a whole house fan for the summer? We got air conditioning units, but there's these whole house fans. Have you guys experienced those?
Say that again, a whole house?
A whole house fan.
Oh, yeah. The old school.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, Frank, those are from your time.
Yes, they are.
Savage.
He used to have ice delivered to his house by a horse and mule.
What do you mean used to?
So a whole house fan is basically a hole in the ceiling on the top floor of a property that has this huge, almost industrial fan. It's got a bunch of louvers on it or something. And basically in the evening when you're going to bed, you flick this fan on for a few minutes and have the windows open, and it sucks all the hot air out of that house, in a heartbeat. It's not the same as air conditioning, but it sure does cool down a house a lot. So that's another thing that you got to be aware of, because you've got this little access point in your attic, and if we get squirrels or chipmunks or bats or something coming in through the winter, that's an easy way into the house, and you want to be discussing that with your tenants of a way in the winter to seal that hole so that they're not having an intrusion. Any other sources of heating or cooling that you guys come across?
Wood burning stoves.
Oh, that's a good one. Fireplaces, wood burning stoves. Again, another source of stuff coming in. Possible fire hazards. I mean, in a rental, do you want anybody bringing in wood and burning it in your property?
No.
I don't think so. So converting that from a wood burning to maybe a gas fireplace or something like that, or just sealing it off altogether, is another thing that we got to talk about when we're looking at these properties. Okay, so number 2, we have basements. Basements. It's a constant headache for all of us. It's a blessing and a curse because you can store all kinds of stuff that you don't need and don't want down there, and your wife brings all kinds of stuff home from the garage sales and stores it down there, and when it floods, it gets all wet and you got to throw it out. No, I'm just joking. The basements are common up here, but they're becoming less and less common. I see a lot more slabs being built. What are the problems you guys run into with basements?
One thing I'll say on basements, and you have to be careful of, this goes back to Cleveland with the lead-based paint. A lot of those older basements, and Cleveland is a lot of older homes, a lot of those older basements have been painted. Basements are notoriously moisture traps. And that paint curls and peels and gets painted over. That's if you're buying a house in Cleveland and it has basement walls that have been painted, in most cases walk away, because that's going to be your lead-based paint source right there.
Yeah. Water intrusion. You guys experience that?
That's
Yeah.
So you got the leaves and the gutters, things like that are causing the water intrusion to come in from the outside, also through the drain. So you got a hole in the ground, and we talked about the seasons. We got this freezing and expand and contract because it's hot, it's cold. Everything is expanding and contracting. So what happens to those basement walls when that happens is you got hydrostatic pressure from the water in the spring that's pushing on those walls, and you start to get a little leak, or you even get a crack in that basement wall. There's different walls that start bowing because there's so much pressure. These are all things that you want a realtor looking for and basically talking you out of some properties, because to me, the basement is the most important part. It doesn't matter how fancy and beautiful the kitchen is. It doesn't matter how much they updated the bathroom. If that basement has issues, from water intrusion to lead-based paint to asbestos around the ductwork or something, or asbestos.
Or asbestos on the floors.
Tile floors.
Yeah, asbestos tiles, yeah.
The basement is the number one reason that I talk people out of a house. So again, it's important that we're discussing that with our investors and making sure that when we go into a property, we're doing a deep dive in that basement to make sure it's
When we
quality.
show a property, it's usually, let's look at the basement first. Why even fall in love with that house if the basement has got problems?
Why waste the time? Yep. And then with the basement, it also has a big, when you look at a basement, it's not only going down in it, it's looking at it from the outside. You know, is the erosion causing water to come back in towards it, or is there a big hill behind the property? Is the house located in a valley? Is it on a flat lot where the water has no place to go but to fill the hole that they created in the ground when they built this house? Those are all important discussions to have, especially with an out of state investor, because we are their boots on the ground. We're the ones that are going out to that property and taking a look at it. They're interested in seeing the inside, but it's also important that we show them the outside and what could possibly happen to that property. Anything else about the basement from you guys' perspective?
Well, from my perspective, from my perspective, we need to do that work so that they're not wasting a bunch of money on inspections that aren't going to pass anyway. So we find that stuff now. Hopefully, you don't get into big problems and you have somebody pay for an inspection that doesn't make it through.
Absolutely.
And with the location and stuff, gutter work is a big deal. So like where all that rain is coming down, like if the property has the appropriate gutter systems to get that water away and help prevent that. If you do see those gutters that just come right down, open up at the edge of the house, it's just helping it get to a centralized location, then come back into the basement.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we talked about the top four. Now here's number one that I've got on here that most people from out of state don't recognize or understand, because I think there's only 3 states left, and we did a separate video on this. But we have what's called Dower here in Ohio. Does somebody want to explain exactly what that is?
Basically, it's your spouse, regardless of whether they're buying the home with you or not, has a third interest in the property. So you cannot buy a house in Ohio without your spouse, if you're married, without your spouse signing off on it, and you cannot sell that property in Ohio without your spouse signing off on it.
How does that affect partnerships? So I'm an investor and I'm talking to a guy that I also know that lives in the same state I do, but not Ohio. And I say, hey, let's both go in on this property. We both happen to be married. How does that affect the purchase of that property or the sale of that property if we don't create an LLC or something to protect that?
If you bought it in the LLC, then it's just the LLC buying. However, if you're buying it as individuals, each state that has Dower, that spouse has to be involved in the transaction as far as signing off.
Yeah. What about if I bought I got 2 single guys that both invest in a property and they're making money off of it for 4 or 5 years. One of them decides to get married. What happens?
Well, he was a jerk.
Whoa.
So
Frank, I think you and I have a little bit of maybe a little more cynical approach to all this than everybody else does.
No, but the one guy gets married, that spouse now has a Dower interest in that property when he goes to sell it.
Basically, you have a third partner involved that wasn't there in the first place because of the rules here in Ohio. Now,
yeah, but only partner in the fact that guy can't sell his interest.
Sure.
So here's a question. So from what I'm hearing, in a Dower State, it's not 1 to buy, 2 to sell. It's 2 to buy, 2 to sell.
Correct.
Okay.
As long as there's a spouse involved, that spouse has to sign off going either direction.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so we're right at 29 minutes. Let's do a
Isn't
quick.
that why they got rid of Dower in Utah? Because there was too many spouses? Real estate killer.
All right, so let's recap real quick and then shut this down. So number 5 was Cleveland is not the only city in Northeast Ohio. Number 4, we have season. It snows, it rains, it's hot, it's cold. We have a little bit of everything and sometimes all in one day. And you got to be aware of that when you're purchasing. We have both hot and cold, and it affects your HVAC and how you manage that and what your property manager needs to be doing to keep the maintenance and stuff up on that. Number two, we have basements. Basements are a hole in the ground that shrink and expand, and they can cause lots and lots of very expensive problems on a property that you're purchasing if you don't purchase right. And then number one, we're a Dower State. That's a very little known fact, but it's important that you know as an investor because you plan for the future when you're doing this, and it's important when you sell that you know what impacts being married or divorced can have on a partnership or even just a single person when they go to sell that house. So, guys, there are the top 5 things to be aware of when investing in a property in Ohio. I thank you guys all for the participation today. That was an awesome, quick live, and I'm going to shut it down now. I appreciate you guys all.
Thanks, everybody. Good selling.